The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Speaker, I just want to change tack slightly and try and talk about the bill, actually, rather than listen to boastful congratulatory messages from list MPs. This is a really serious issue, and I'm very pleased that the bill's before the House. I want to commend the Minister, Louise Upston, for introducing it, but also commend her for the respect that she showed all the Canterbury members of Parliament by giving us a briefing quite early on in the piece about the proposal, and then a briefing again today before the debate that's just about to conclude. I enjoyed that, and I really appreciate her doing it. I want to commend Nick Smith for standing in for her today. He understands these issues, and I think his contribution to the House was worthy of a positive mention, as are a number of the others, but I just want to highlight two, not out of respect for the other contributors, but because two of the earlier speakers made contributions that I want to respond to. Scott Simpson is the chair of the Local Government and Environment Select Committee, and I want to thank him for what I believe was a genuine and will be delivered promise to the people of Canterbury that this will not be rushed legislation, that it will be taken at a pace that recognises that this issue needs to be resolved, but won't be rushed through in a way that means that people whose literal properties are impacted by this legislation don't get a fair say. And I think we can meet what some may see as a tension. Let's get this through as quickly as possible, or as quickly as is sensible, but also the need to listen to people's concerns or views or praise of it, whatever their views may be. So I want to thank Scott Simpson for making that commitment on behalf of the Local Government and Environment Select Committee. I also want to acknowledge that he is, he's done a bit of legal work. You wouldn't really think that. He seems like such a nice person. You wouldn't think he was a lawyer. He's done land law as well, and he emphasised the fact that this is actually quite a significant change in the law. And I don't think we should just say, as the speaker before me said, this is just a minor matter. Actually, it's quite a fundamental change in the law, as it has always been since the first time we had property boundaries recognised. So I want to acknowledge his thought about the significance of the legislation. I also want to acknowledge Dennis O'Rourke, New Zealand First Member of Parliament. He's another person who's had experience and practice in the law, and he did say, he did comment that Labor members were overly complicating it, that this was straightforward and that it just needed sorting. I'm not in agreement with the point that we were overly complicating it. I do think we were raising concerns, but also agree with his fundamental point that this is a matter that needs to be sorted. In fact, the Law Society raised significant concerns about this right back in 2012. It's nearly the end of 2015 now. This is not a matter that the government could say, oh, well, we need to push this through because it needs resolution. For 3.5 years, surveyors and the Law Society have been raising legitimate concerns about what is happening to people's property, their property rights, their insurance, their rebuild, and those concerns, properly raised, have fallen on deaf ears until now. So I don't want any members of the government saying this needs to be rushed through. I would like them to answer the concerns that we have. Mr Speaker, I commented earlier that I was grateful for the briefing that Minister Louise Upston gave to all the Canterbury members of Parliament. I think that was a good thing. I asked her at that meeting to please ensure that between that meeting and now, which is several months, it wasn't just last week, that homeowners who are impacted by this legislation were consulted and given an opportunity to say, this will sort it, or this will cause more problems, or why don't you think of that? And I regret that despite me having that commitment by the Minister that that would be done, that she unfortunately went to the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority, not a highly recommended strategy by anyone who has had to deal with that organisation, and they recommended going to CanCern. CanCern is an advocacy organisation. It doesn't have the technical expertise or the background in this particular area. They've been a very valuable organisation for a lot of things, but they don't have the expertise in this area. This is a legal matter about boundaries and the impact on homeowners, individual property owners or their neighbours on what is going to happen now that we are going to clarify, actually change the law. And instead of what we have always done traditionally since the start of property boundaries, said that boundaries do not move with the land, we're going to turn that law on its head and say in Canterbury, they do. I don't know what that means for other parts of New Zealand. You know, what about when there are huge floods? What about when there are cliff collapses? What about when there are other significant land movements? Will this just apply to Canterbury? And how will people who are negatively impacted in other parts of the country feel about that? I don't know. In Canterbury, we have 124,000 people who have had small land movements, less than 20 centimetres. We've got 10,000 who have had land movement between 20 and 50 centimetres. That's not insignificant. That could have quite an impact on the boundaries. And we've got over 1,000 who have had land movement of more than 50 centimetres. So that's 132,000 people. The briefing that the Minister gave us today, she said there are about 300 people for whom land movement and boundary staying fixed, i.e. not moving with the land, there are about 300 that Lynn's know of who are in dispute. That's a significant amount, and this legislation doesn't make it clear if there's a fair, speedy process about how those disputes are going to be resolved if we change the law in the manner that is proposed in this bill. So those are pretty significant questions, and they are layered upon a population who have been through a lot of stress. People went through a lot of stress through the quakes. I know some members are a bit over hearing about that, but you know, tragically, it's a reality for people living in Canterbury. We've also had significant floods of a different nature than we've had for many years. We've had thousands of homes identified as being on potentially contaminated land. We've recently had the coastal hazards notification by the Christchurch City Council talking about the increase in sea level and the increased vulnerability as a result. And because of the earthquake sequence, we've got increased liquefaction vulnerability and increased flooding vulnerability caused not by sea level change, but by the land height. Mr. Speaker, the point of raising that is that these changes cannot just be imposed on a population. They need to be worked through sensitively and carefully, and with particular attention to detail about what impact this will have, perhaps on individual property rights. I was hoping that the ACT member might take a call and raise that very point, but he hasn't had an opportunity to do that so far. But also on the potential when people are currently planning either a repair or a rebuild of their earthquake damaged or destroyed property, or perhaps are looking to make an extension. What difference will this make in practical terms to people's property rights? I think that people need to know the answer to those questions before we progress to the final stages of the legislation, and that's the point of the Select Committee. I am sure the Select Committee will be meeting in Christchurch. We need to remember that this isn't Christchurch specific, it affects the other, our neighbours in Waimakariri and Selwyn District Council areas as well, and it certainly needs careful and sensitive thought. Mr. Speaker, I just want to conclude by acknowledging Adrian Cowie. Adrian Cowie is a licensed cadastral surveyor. He said, I think right back from 2013, but certainly consistently throughout 2014, that the incorrect legal boundaries that we were operating under were causing catastrophic consequences for Canterburyans. Those were the issues that were raised in personal letters to Jerry Brownlee and the Prime Minister, John Key. They have taken over 2 years to be responded to. I don't want us to now rush the outcome. I want us to get it
Sorry,
right.
the member's time has expired.